Rod going ahead and speaking. Rod?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Bill and all. And it's great to be with you all on this beautiful spring morning here. Up here, it's cool and sunny. Forecasted for the rest of the week to be in the 60s. It's a beautiful spring day. Thanks. And this presentation is titled "Right Plant, Right Place: and Best Practices in Using Native Plants," and we'll see how that relates to what we call non-native invasive plants or invasive exotic plants. Okay, next screen, please. Next slide. Native plants are those that occur locally and naturally without direct or indirect human intervention. I'd put the word locally in there just as an extra underscoring the idea of naturally occurring. We really don't think in terms of, pre-Columbus and things like that, or regionally native, but a plant is native if it naturally occurs, excluding humans. Most of those will be local, not restricted locally, but what you find locally and naturally. Next frame, please. These plants have co-evolved with animals and microorganisms over millennia, each occupying its particular niche, but collectively forming the eastern deciduous forest that many of us live in the midst of. These two flowers pictures are of spring ephemerals, what we call the spring ephemerals, which are the plants that occupy the forest floors of our deciduous forests. Spring beauty on the bottom. You can see the plant-animal interaction there. The stripes on the petals of the flower, those pink stripes, are actually nectar guides for the pollinators to maximize efficiencies in pollinating the plant. And plants and animals, of course, co-evolve together. Many fine remnants of this once vast forest still remain in our region, but there's also very much fragmentation and disturbance, including new threats that are always on the horizon, such as non-native invasive plants, insects, diseases, and climate change. Next frame, please. Non-native invasive plants or invasive exotic plants are those that are especially invasive, damaging, and persistent. Species that produce pervasive seed bank and those that prevent natural succession by native plants. These are things like Japanese stiltgrass, wavy leaf basket grass now, lots of others. They produce tremendous seed banks, and basically a number of them are annuals, and they come up and early and eventually outcompete the native flora. Non-native invasive plants are today, and for the past several decades, probably since the 1980s, the greatest threat to natural areas and global biodiversity, second only to habitat loss resulting from development and urbanization. And most of the non-native invasive plants are horticultural introductions from the landscape and nursery industries. A number of them are agricultural weeds or just accidents that came over from other lands. For instance, like in the Japanese stiltgrass was thought to have arrived in North America as, packing material, as dried grass, as packing material in shipping. But most of them are horticultural introductions. Next, please. Invasive plants can disrupt ecosystems and reduce biodiversity, greatly impacted at multiple trophic levels. You've got invasive insects living in areas that have been seriously degraded by non-native invasive plants. These are things like ticks, our native ticks that or not that flourish in degraded areas, such as areas that have bush honeysuckle dominant in the landscape. And this frame here is porcelain berry, just completely smothering a area that in a freshwater tidal wetlands. Next, please. So here are some trees. Most of these are, in fact, all of these are a number of them are prized trees in the nursery and landscape industry. A lot of them very familiar to gardeners and to and designers and the like. Some of these are very common and overused, hence why they're invasive. Some of them are not used as much, but so the word "common" in the title doesn't really apply to a couple of these, like the BB tree, but I included things like the BB tree and a couple others in here, simply because they're so invasive, even though they're infrequently used at this point. Some, like crepe myrtle, are dominant staples in the landscape industry, and it's been discovered that it's becoming invasive, especially the farther south one gets. But it's seeding into areas. Some of them are seriously invasive, like Norway maple. Of course, the Callery pear, aka Bradford pear, aristocrat pear, the Pyrus calleriana. It's a really highly invasive weed. The Higgin cherry, the weeping cherry, is extremely invasive into woodlands, producing just many thousands of seeds. It's pretty much in the DC area up here. That's in every single forested park we have, just thousands of seedlings produced annually, and saplings. Problem is, a lot of folks aren't really monitoring or controlling those seedlings. They just grow in the woodlands, and they're just overlooked. So golden rain tree, bad weed. These are all species that really should not be planted. They're highly invasive. I sent a article that was just published recently that has a couple of these species in it. For instance, the crack willow here, Salix X fragilis. That's important to note. That's the main willow that's used in landscaping in North America, and it's a highly invasive weed. And the weeping willow is part of that complex, and really should not be should be used. It reproduces vegetatively and by seed. So these are all plants that extreme caution should be used when planting them, because even if you have these in your yard, generally they will spread from a yard to a natural area by way of either airborne or in storm drains or the like, or by birds. Next, please. These are some common shrubs in landscaping, and I'm not going through every single. There's just not enough time to go through all these guys. You all know these plants well, but these are some of the dominant and most troublesome weeds we have. Burning bush, for instance. Everybody loves the brilliant scarlet fall color on this plant, but it's extremely invasive. And you can go to any natural area park or forested park in the DC area, and you're going to find this plant really by the thousands, in all forms: seedlings, saplings, large fruit-bearing plants. All of them outcompete native flora and really seriously degrade those woodland areas. That's the top left. Japanese snowball, top right frame. That's just one of many ornamental viburnums that's highly invasive, that finds its way all over the place. A lot of these find their way even into forested wetlands like magnolia bogs or seepage swamps, and they'll grow on the hummocks in there and just completely start taking over the site. So basically, and that's true for many species. We've got the Japanese snowball viburnum, but we have the tea viburnum. Viburnum satigerum is really bad. We've got the there are several others. The ornamental viburnums. So really want to use the native species when you're planting. There's two fine native viburnums to use instead: the black haw viburnum, which is Viburnum prutifolium, or arrowwood viburnum, the Viburnum dentatum. Bottom left, you've got oak leaf hydrangea. That's been observed to be invasive, not like the ones we just discussed, but it's new on the horizon. It's a much prized plant in the landscape, but it's been known to become invasive. And here's a shot of it growing in the cracks of pavement. Chinese holly, the bottom right, is a serious weed. It's usually sold as the Nellie Stevens, the large tree form, or the Burford holly. They're all Ilex cornuta, the Chinese holly, but the Burford cultivar selection is the tree. The Nellie Stevens is a tree form, and then the Burford is the dwarf, is the shrubbier one, and produce a lot of fruit, and they spread, but they revert back to just plain Chinese holly, the Ilex cornuta. They don't retain the cultivar form, but that's a bad weed in the natural world as well. Next, please. Bamboos. Thank you. The bamboos, we all know, are just abject weeds. Top left, you've got Japanese arrow bamboo. That's one of the most common ones. That's the wide-bladed, dark green leaved, wide-leaved bamboo. larger one is the one on the right there, the top left to the right of the frame picture is the yellow groove bamboo. And in that Castania article that I sent out that for the participants in this presentation, that goes into a discussion on these plants, that what the common bamboos are in Virginia, in the South, mid-Atlantic region, really. And so that's a good source for those who want to know more about the bamboos, but these are all invasive. None of them should be planted. A lot of times people might plant them in a yard thinking they can control them, and they might even achieve that. But when they sell their home or the years later, the bamboo is therefore escaped, and it's causing lots of trouble. These are the four common varieties of bamboo here. None of them are native. We have a couple native species of bamboo in Virginia, including one that's all over the Tidewater area in the Pine Barrens in southeastern Virginia. The native cane, but very much different than these bamboos here. Next frame, please. We all know these awful plants, English ivy. This is the top left, that's Rock Creek Park. That's just a solid mass of English ivy there. And you can see in the center of the picture, sort of, there's some May-apples popping up, but not many of them. It's over many decades here in these woodlands where you have English ivy just as carpets on the ground, but also up the trunks of the trees. You have a smothered or suppressed forest, and the native wildflowers and vegetation that would occur on the forest floor has been displaced or seriously suppressed. You've got Pachysandra, the top right frame, Pachysandra, just a continuous carpet here. Daylily, the bottom left, same thing there. Very difficult to get rid of that, of daylily. And periwinkle, either the bottom right, we've got both the greater periwinkle, Vinca major, mixed with the common periwinkle, which is the smaller leaved species, and that's Vinca minor. Very difficult to get rid of these. You have to do a number of treatments, chemical applications, herbicides. These four make a good example together of why non-native invasive plants are such a problem. These are basically ecological dead zones. They have their function their natural function as a forest community is seriously impaired and requires serious restoration, not in the form of planting, but in the form of subtracting these problem weeds. And it usually requires large-scale funding to do this. We're lucky in Alexander that we have, for the past 7 or 8 years, we've had good funding, at large-scale funding, 6-figure a year, to finally get into these areas and treat them. As some of the other jurisdictions around the DC metro area do as well, some do not. And so there's a lot of degraded land, and it's basically a dead zone. Next, please. Got more lariat, a lily turf, top left. This is in a hardwood tidal swamp, and just gets in there, and it's very difficult to remove this plant. It's a creeping creeps on stolons, and it's very difficult to control. Top right, Japanese jump seed. This is new on the horizon, not to gardeners, but to as understanding what it is as a species. A lot of folks actually, this was bought and sold as a native plant because the botanist that named it before the name had changed, been corrected, used the name, the specific epithet of Virginiana, which confused everyone, thinking that it was a variety of our native Virginia knotweed. It's not. It's an Asian plant, and extremely invasive and difficult to remove. And so basically the theme of this, as you might have gathered, is that basically avoid using plants that you don't need to use, such as what we've seen so far. They really aren't. Try using true natives that are local, a truly native plant, not a regional native plant, not a North American native plant, but a truly native plant in your planting efforts. Certainly when you're near a natural area, because a lot of these things have shown to be invasive. It's just a matter of time. Bottom left, for instance, another good example of that is the so-called Boston ivy, Parthenocissus cuspidata. It has nothing to do with Boston. When they talk about Ivy League, they're not talking about English ivy. They're talking about this Boston ivy, which is an Asian species. It's not native. It grows nicely on bricks, and it's a relative of our Virginia creeper. It's a beautiful fall color. It's highly invasive too. And here it is. Here's a seedling or a little sapling of it. Looks like a little bit like poison ivy. It's got 3 leaves, but you can tell if you saw more of the plant that's not in this frame, you'd be able to separate it immediately from poison ivy or whatever. But this is a young vine, but it forms very large roots, very difficult to get rid of once it gets established. Bottom right, the Italian arum. That's all over the place. These things find their way out of people's yards into natural areas, stream valleys, and the like, and they persist for decades and spread. Next, please. A lot of people wouldn't imagine that ferns are a problem, but they have. They especially grow in stream valleys and along streams where you have exposed mineral soil. Such as the top left frame here. The Japanese red shield fern is one of our very worst ones. That's all over the landscape industry. You find it in people's yards everywhere. One of the reasons is this, because the nurseries aren't growing the native ferns, or because it's a lot easier to propagate these non-native species. And most of these non-native ferns most, if not all of them, are invasive, highly invasive, some. Next, please. So we have the bulbs like the common star of Bethlehem. That's pretty much everywhere in fields. You find it in people's yards, natural areas, all over the place. Top right, the native ornamental grasses was a big movement in the late 80s, and early in the 90s, in the so-called naturalistic landscape movement that was popular then. And a lot of the grasses that were staples in that movement, like the Chinese silvergrass, top right, extremely invasive. And there's a lot of different varieties of that, and a lot of other grasses that are really bad, like the one at the bottom left, fountain grass, extremely invasive too. That's taken over whole. You find that along in stream beds. You find it along stream valleys, floodplains, everywhere. Cracks of pavement all over the place. Chocolate vine, to the bottom right, the Akebia crenata. That's a pervasive weed, very, very difficult to remove. Very, very small leaves, hard to get enough chemical on them to really make an impact on the root system. Next, please. This is the recent Virginia Native Plant Society last year put a lot of work into a statement on cultivars. And because that's really a parallel discussion to non-native invasive plants and the best practices in using native plants. For instance, the photo here is this very popular, common cultivar of our native swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, the ice ballet cultivar. And someone found a white flowering swamp milkweed somewhere in the country, and selected it and cloned it. Probably patented it as well, but cloned it to so that you always have the white variety or form. Obviously, it's a very rare. The native, the true species is pink. It's always pink, and it's never really varies from that color much. So this is an anomaly, and it's a rare anomaly in nature, and it's not the sort of thing that should be mass produced and used in place of the native, the common native one, the typical form, for a lot of different reasons. You don't want these plants to hybridize. They basically pollute the natural species. So if you have, let's say in Williamsburg, Tidewater, you've got a lot of the native swamp milkweed around. You don't need the pollinators cross-pollinating these ice ballet with the native species, because you're going to get you end up seriously degrading and polluting the gene pool. You don't make it stronger, you make it you end up polluting it, because there's a reason the white form is extremely rare. And to make it to artificially introduce it into other areas where it's not native can be a serious problem. That's one of them. Another one is that one is, by using cultivars, you're using clones, because the cultivars generally are plants that are cloned. Some of them are hybrids, and wouldn't want to use those for sure. A lot of them or some of them don't have atypical characters like the ice ballet, and basically they're a cultivar because humans have manipulated the natural plant. It ceases to become a native plant at that point. So hence the need for the statement on cultivars here, and it did a good job with the with their policy statement, and they also encouraging the horticulture industry to try to grow locally collected and local provenance seed and plant material. And some companies are doing that. We have a couple up here in the DC area that have been doing it for a long time, very successfully. Earth Sangha is one of them, and the other is Chesapeake Natives Nursery in Maryland. And then Ernst Seed in Pennsylvania is goes around the eastern United States and collects local ecotypes of seed to grow. The only problem with that is, I think that's a great idea, and it probably works well, but the problem is when you bring things back to a large nursery and you put them all together, they all cross together, and you can't keep these things separate, basically, if they're close to each other, which is the whole point of why we don't want to introduce these things into areas they don't naturally occur. Next, please. Here's a good example of, I use the blazing star, the grass leaf blazing star, Liatris pilosa, here as an example of, in the city of Alexandria, for instance, we're purely on the coastal plain and fall zone, no Piedmont. We have the native species in eastern Fairfax County and Alexandria would be the plant here, the Liatris pilosa. That, unless you're dealing with a restoration, ecological restoration nursery like Earth Sangha, which does grow this species, no other nursery around grows the correct species for that part of Virginia. What they offer is a species that's rare in Maryland, and one that the nurseries propagated. They offer the Liatris spicata, and that does not occur in areas, but it's very popular and as a staple in the landscape industry. They even have white cultivars of that as well. And so unfortunately what happens is people think they're planting a native plant, and they're not. They're planting Liatris spicata all over the places like, for instance, Williamsburg. That's not native at all to the Williamsburg area, but that's likely what's planted there when folks are looking for a blazing star, a so-called native blazing star. And that's a big problem because it basically pollutes and degrades the landscape, because it'll start seeding around, and it'll change the landscape, basically. So you lose a little bit of natural Williamsburg or the southeastern Virginia coastal plain landscape is now being altered by not just non-native invasive plants or let's say exotic plants, but regionally native or Virginia native plants that are not at all native to the southeastern Virginia area. That's why the overarching principles for all planting and planting efforts should be do no harm and keep it natural. And don't use cultivars, horticultural selections, clones, and hybrids in these areas, the preferred use is site appropriate straight species only. Next, please. It's important to select site appropriate common native plants for ecological restoration in large scale plantings and not rare species, as common plants provide the foundation for most habitats and wildlife. These include successional plants like the eastern red cedar and the broom sedge grasses and goldenrods and things like that, rather than buying a collection of rare plants and having like a botanical garden or something like that. Now, most folks are not practicing ecological restoration in their yards, and that's understood. But common plants like this, the common milkweed, is the choice that for the it's a common milkweed rather than some of these exotic ones or hard to find rare ones. So you want to use native if you're planting for wildlife and for restoration. You use the common species, and then eventually they will restore and provide the foundation for a natural landscape. Because you really just can't. It's not possible to shoehorn rare species that have been lost into a landscape again until the conditions are right for that. Next, please. Getting a lot of inappropriate plant material in large-scale planting projects, and most of that is coming from the stream construction project post plantings. This is a awful looking picture here of a recent post construction project in Fairfax County, Virginia. The stream is in the middle of the picture, but you can't see it because they dumped tons, well, not tons, actually hundreds of pounds of seeds of different seed, a riparian seed mix blend in here. Some of the species aren't native. A lot of them aren't even native to Fairfax County or Northern Virginia. None of them collectively replace the forested stream valley that was here before the project was misapplied. So this is really basically just gardening in the wild. Basically, it's a gardening exercise that's not very well constructed or implemented, and it's just a hodgepodge of plants that has no fidelity to a known natural community. And just because one plants lots of something doesn't mean that it produces anything of ecological value. Next, please. Landscape memory lost. We were talking about that a bit with the introduction of inappropriate material. Here's an example of well-intentioned plans and an idea, but somebody with a large yard, beautiful trees, didn't know what to do with it, and was at the mercy of the nursery industry and the flyers and the propaganda that comes out, that sort of thing about all the great plants you must have, and et cetera, et cetera. So they basically hired someone to scrape off all the forest floor here, and they put, mix everything from Alberta spruce to English boxwoods to whatever you name it's in here, Chinese holly, whatever. It's a disaster in every way. This used to be a nice swamp forest with a strong, with a large spring with a lot of seepage flow. And had an understory of the native viburnums and native hawthorns and things like that. And it's been just basically scraped away and replaced with ecologically valueless plants. Doug Tellamy has done a lot of, as you all know, done a lot of great work in showing the importance of, or reminding everyone the importance of native plants, and even he's even gone to the degree of featuring those the most important plants for wildlife. And what you want to do is, if you're for helping our native wildlife in urbanized areas, it's essential that you plant for insects. And of course, Doug does a lot with the caterpillars, the native caterpillars that feed the neotropical migrants, the spring warblers and interior forest birds. But there are a lot of other insects that are basically the foundation of the ecosystem. So plants and insects together are what you want to plant for if you're planting for wildlife. Everything else follows from there. The birds come secondarily to that. That's what I mean by ecologically valueless plants. The non-native plants and certainly the invasive plants provide little to no wildlife habitat and benefit to wildlife, and in many cases they end up displacing the beneficial plants, the native plants. Next, please. I put in just a bit from a presentation that I've done a number of times, on native or lawn alternatives. And not to go through all this exactly, but basically that lawns are an important part of a garden and a residential landscape as well. And basically a lot of them are what we call these native lawns, or these no-mow lawns, that are the remnants of a upland pasture, or they're basically savannas under oaks and hickories of the that were preserved when the homes were built carefully in the 1940s and 50s. And so we'll see a frame in a minute of an example of that. But basically the idea is to try to preserve that if one is so inclined, because there's a whole suite of native grasses, sedges, rushes, and small wildflowers, diminutive wildflowers that occur naturally in there, that are present in these native lawns, that are beneficial and important for wildlife, and very attractive, and so we don't want to destroy them. And the trees themselves and the wildlife with fertilizers, pesticides, and amendments like lime, things that and nutrients that change the soil chemistry and feed pathogens. The more nitrogen one puts on their plants in their property, the more one is feeding pathogens that attack trees and vegetation and grow weeds. Basically, it's fertilizers really belong in vegetable gardens and in agriculture. They don't really belong in residential gardens. Next, please. So here's an example of pretty much everything you see in this picture is native. Really large backyard. It's an upland oak hickory savanna. And these are all low sedges. Yeah, we've got a lot of moss that covers the bare ground, a lot of wildflowers, poverty oak grass, things like that. Next, please. We just talked about this. Fertilizers, lime, pesticides destroy most native grasses, the wildflowers, and wildlife. Obviously, if people are putting grubicides down and things to kill animals in their yard, which is really alarming each time that one gets a flyer for spring gardening sales and such at a nursery. You see, bags and of pesticides for killing grubs and for killing all kinds of insects in one's soil. And that's really a bad, awful practice to do, because you're killing everything, and including things you probably wouldn't expect. Leaf compost and manure, only appropriate for agriculture, vegetable gardens, and traditional lawns. Absolutely destroy the balanced acidic soils and the soil microorganisms of woodlands and semi-natural areas. Next, please. So getting to Ptolemy and other movements to incorporate our home landscape in a natural, truly natural way by using native plants properly and gardening for wildlife and for nature. That could include just carefully preserving native canopy oaks that one has on their property, rather than gardening in the roots with non-native plants, things like that. Sometimes preserving what one has is more important than, at least as important as introducing new things. Basically, we all know about the insect apocalypse. We've lost enormous amounts of insect biomass, and because of the unhealthy conditions we've created in the urban and suburban areas, landscape. And so we need to reverse that trend and stop using chemicals, plant the right species that provide habitat for these animals, and then slowly but surely we will reverse the negative destructive trend of what we've done to artificialize the landscape in a very short order of time too. Most places were still quite natural, even 4 or 5 decades ago. And we've really done a lot to seriously degrade those areas. Next. So